All right, so we are awaiting President Trump reissuing his travel ban. It appears that his administration is not going to appeal anymore the previous travel ban. They're going to reissue it. So how would he do this? How would he rewrite the travel ban in order for it to pass constitutional muster? Let's talk to a constitutional expert. It's our friend Byron Henry, who joins me again on the Grip Tight Foundation Repair Newsmaker line. Byron, it's always a pleasure. Thanks for joining me again on WHO in Des Moines.
My pleasure.
So, Byron, what I assume that the administration is doing is that they're looking at the court ruling on the previous travel ban, and they're now going to try to write a travel ban that would fit and address the concerns that the court previously had. How do you envision that? How would you stay carefully within the lines that the court has established?
Well, first of all, I'm not sure that the Ninth Circuit's hasty and what I would consider shoddy opinion is the metric by which they should measure the new order, but it certainly should be taken into consideration because
Sure.
3 judges at least thought some of the arguments had some merit at the early stage of the case, the preliminary stage. But the main 2 issues, I think, that have been raised over and over and actually produced standing for the state of Minnesota and Washington through their universities were green card holders or lawful permanent residents, which we now know the executive order didn't apply to, according to the White House counsel, and people that already have their visas and are either in the country or are traveling abroad and trying to get back to the country using their already issued visas from the State Department. According to the memorandum, the new executive order will basically carve out and accept from coverage anyone that is a lawful permanent resident or green card holder or those that have visas already issued by the State Department. So in that respect, if you have visas or you're a lawful permanent resident, you're basically carving out the only groups that have any tie to the United States, so to speak, that could claim some statutory or pseudo-constitutional right to either come to the country or to stay in the country. So once you do that, you leave all the others affected by the order with basically no mooring or anchor to the United States. They're not here, they don't have a visa, they don't have a green card, so they don't have any standing status or right under the Constitution or statutes to file suit.
And you certainly have precedent for that, Byron, because presidents are given the authority, broad authority. You and I have talked about this previously, but if you were going to look at the past practices of presidents, they have targeted countries where they say there's a particular danger to U.S. citizens. We're going to put a temporary halt on people coming from that country, correct? You argue precedent in this case.
Certainly Congress has given the president carte blanche with respect to the entry of aliens that he believes are a detriment to the country. And, of course, we know that the 7 countries that are identified by President Trump were not drawn from a hat. They were actually designated countries of concern with respect to terrorism by George W. Bush administration and President Obama's administration. So these are defined countries that have already been noted, and we already know from reports now that there have both been arrests and convictions of individuals from these countries for committing or planning terrorist activities in the United States from those 7 countries. So there's plenty of evidence and support for those 7 countries. So I don't think it's basically, it's not random, so to speak. There is method to the madness, so to speak.
And looking at what is being reported by the media that also will be included in this new travel ban, in the initial travel ban, he said, I want to ban refugees from Syria indefinitely. Looks like he's not going to do that. Do you think that has any kind of standing because, again, what you and I have talked about, Byron, is you're right. The Congress gives the president really broad authority in this area, but it looks like the president is trying to figure out some things that he needs to change. Do you think he does have the authority to look at a country like Syria and say, look, indefinitely, I don't think that we ought to be bringing in refugees from this country?
Absolutely. I think he has the executive authority to direct through the Department of Homeland Security the settlement of refugees. I mean, President Obama altered the program internally on numerous occasions and expanded and contracted the number of refugees from Syria and other countries. The president certainly has that same authority, although he has decided to just lump Syria in with the rest of the countries and do a review of the refugee program in toto as opposed to specifically targeting or identifying Syria. I think he has the absolute right to suspend the entire refugee program under the law if for a temporary period of time and not allow entry until he gets his bearings and he wants to do a review of the entire process and make sure the vetting is both thorough and appropriate.
And as you know, the Department of Homeland Security yesterday, Byron, issued new rules. I shouldn't call them new rules, but basically said, look, we're going to be stricter about enforcing the existing law in this country. And there were reports that the ACLU said, we're going to go to court over this, which, as a layperson, what strikes me as weird about that is if you say, I'm just going to enforce existing law, what are you going to court over? What do you think, Byron, is the ACLU would argue in this instance?
I have no – I can only speculate as to some legal theory that they would come up with, but the idea that the president, who has the authority to order deported every single person in the country that is here illegally, the remedy for which is deportation,
right.
The fact that he has decided to only focus his efforts on a very small percentage of illegal immigrants that have been convicted or charged with a criminal offense seems to me less, draconian and more merciful, meaning he is not exercising the full authority that Congress has given him to deport and charge illegal immigrants. He is simply exercising it on a small percentage. Now, granted, that percentage is slightly larger than the percentage that President Obama was focusing on, where he was focusing on convicted felons and violent criminals.
Mm-hmm.
So that was President Obama's decision. President Trump has expanded that slightly to also include other crimes, even minor crimes, if you've been charged or convicted. Basically, if you come here illegally, he's looking the other way at the time being. But if you come here and commit a crime, he's no longer willing to look the other way.
The other thing that I'd like to ask you, Byron, is you and I have talked before about this Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals ruling, and as you said, it is slotty, it's shoddy, it's slipshod. The president apparently is not going to appeal it. Should I be worried as a citizen that decision is out there, or is this just something that the courts are not going to take into account in the future?
Well, I think it certainly is precedent, meaning it is out there, and unless they withdraw the opinion because the case becomes moot, it will cause a problem. But listen, the Ninth Circuit opinion on these issues is so far out there already. This would just be one in a number of problematic decisions from the Ninth Circuit. And it didn't really set a whole new law. It just cited some general Supreme Court decisions and said, generally, we can't say that the government's going to win this case. So because it was in the preliminary stages and it wasn't a final adjudication, I don't think it upends immigration law or curbs the president's power simply by being out there in the law books. But certainly it would be better if it was taken off the books completely, and if they were smart, they would do so, because it was hastily done, and it just basically has a lot of general, broad views of immigration law and the president's authority, and I don't think that it is accurate under Supreme Court precedent, and therefore it probably shouldn't be considered precedent.
So do you expect, I know, Byron, it's hard to look in the crystal ball in the future, but obviously the Trump people made the decision, we are not going to appeal, we're just going to rewrite the executive order. Do you expect more court challenge? And what's the strategy here by the Trump administration to not appeal that ruling, but just simply say, I'm going to rewrite the order? What do you think about that?
I think two things that matter in that respect. One is the fact that there was a bit of vagueness in the order as to whether it applied to lawful permanent residents or visa holders that were actually in the country, and so that was an issue. They tried to clear it up to the White House counsel. The Ninth Circuit did not take the White House counsel at his word, so they knew they needed to make a cleanup anyway on that issue. So that's one. And two is time. They can continue to fight this litigation through the stay period and the injunction stage and then the merit stage all the way up to the Supreme Court. And as we know from the fight with President Obama's immigration action, that takes multiple months and years. That's still in court, by the way, that immigration action from when President Obama was president. So the bottom line is that time is the other factor. They'd rather get something on the books. It's national security. The Trump administration feels it's urgent, and they'd rather get it right. And if they made a mistake, admit it and get it correct, then just delay this out for months and years, only to find out they're going to have to rewrite some of it anyway.
That is constitutional expert Byron Henry. Byron, I always appreciate your point of view. Thank you for taking the time on this Wednesday morning.
My pleasure. Thanks. Bye-bye.
That was what was intriguing to me. I don't have a legal background.